I will now call this meeting to order. Welcome to meeting number 143 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Access to Information, Privacy and Ethics. Pursuant to Standing Order 108-3H and the motion adopted by the committee on Tuesday, October 29, 2024, the committee is resuming its study of privacy breaches at the Canada Revenue Agency.
We welcome our witnesses today. We've got from the offices of the offices of the Information and Privacy Commissioners of Canada, Monsieur Philippe Dufresne, who is the Privacy Commissioner of Canada, as well as Isabelle Gervais, who is the Deputy Commissioner Compliance. Commissioner, I've given you up to 10 minutes to address the committee with your opening statement. Please go ahead. Thank you.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Chair, members of the committee. I'd like to thank you for the invitation to speak to this critically important issue. Data breaches have surged over the past decade, both in scale and in complexity and also in severity. As stewards of sensitive personal information, government institutions are attractive targets. To ensure that personal information is protected, federal organizations, including my office, the Office of the Privacy Commissioner of Canada, must be continuously adapting to an evolving threat environment.
2024, we tabled a special report to Parliament with our conclusions on an investigation into a 2020 credential stuffing incident that impacted the Canada Revenue Agency, the CRA, and Employment and Social Development Canada, ESDC. During the final stages of this investigation, we learned of other breaches related to CERB fraud that the CRA had not reported to the OPC, dating back to 2020 and affecting up to 15,000 individuals. We indicated these breaches in our special report and added that we would be following up on this with the CRA. The OPC recommendations in this investigation included improving communications and decision-making frameworks to facilitate a rapid response to attacks and developing comprehensive incident response processes to prevent, detect, contain, and mitigate future breaches. Both the CRA and ESDC agreed to implement these recommendations. On May 9 of 2024, the OPC received a breach report from CRA retroactively covering incidents from May 2020 to November 2023, which captured 31,393 separate incidents. The OPC's breach response team has met regularly with the CRA since then to find out more about the CRA's response to the situation and to be kept up to date on the actions that the CRA is taking to address the breaches, notify and mitigate risks to Canadians. Les discussions portées sur le rapport d'atteinte.
There have been ongoing discussions related to the breach report, but also pertaining to the February 2024 investigation report, given the linkages between both. Indeed, the CRA confirmed that of the 31,393 incidents, approximately 15,000 related to CERB fraud incidents that were mentioned in our special report to Parliament. In the context of our ongoing engagement with them, on October 25, 2024, the CRA notified my office of approximately 3,200 additional material breaches that occurred in 2023 and 2024.
They sought and ultimately obtained an exemption by the Treasury Board so that they could report individual cases of unauthorized use of taxpayer information by a third party to the TBS and to my office on a quarterly basis instead of within a 7-day period for operational reasons. I had indicated to the TBS that while I would support this exception, I recommended that it be for a limited time period of 12 months, that the CRA be required to promptly notify and provide information, support, and advice to affected individuals, and that the breach reports include additional details, including how and when affected individuals were notified and what additional actions were taken by the CRA to improve personal information safeguards. On October 29, 2024, following the receipt of a complaint, I launched a formal investigation. This investigation will determine whether the CRA met its obligations under the Privacy Act and whether it employed adequate safeguards and breach response processes. The privacy breaches at the CRA, both in the earlier credential stuffing investigation and the one more recently reported, underscores the risk to personal information and the importance that must be placed on addressing and mitigating all breaches, including cyber incidents. My office regularly engages with federal institutions by providing advice and helping to assess the privacy impacts of new programs and technologies, following up on the response to breach incidents, resolving situations that were raised through privacy complaints, and conducting investigations. Each engagement and compliance activity plays an important role in supporting and advancing privacy protection across the Government of Canada, which is increasingly complex and significant in this digital era. Le commissariat fournit des conseils et des orientations aux
This includes advice and guidance to support organizations in addressing and mitigating the risks posed by breaches, including on how to prevent, contain, and report breaches, as well as the importance notifying affected individuals. Data breaches represent one of the most significant threats to personal information globally. In the 2023-2024 fiscal year ending on March 31st, 2024, my office received more than 350 reports of cyber incidents. The vast majority, so over 90%, were from private sector organizations.
Investigations into other major privacy breaches. These include the Ticketmaster Canada breach that impacted over 500,000 Canadians, and a joint international investigation with my counterpart, the United Kingdom Information Commissioner, into the 23andMe data breach, which involved sensitive DNA data. We know that breaches can occur even when organizations have put in place safeguards. This is why an effective response to a breach is also critical to mitigating the impact on Canadians and preserving trust in their institutions. Given the significance of these risks and the potential impacts that they can have on individuals, timely breach reporting requirements need to be made a legal obligation under the Privacy Act rather than a Treasury Board Secretariat policy requirement as they currently are. In 2023, the OPC requested and obtained additional temporary funding as part of Budget 2023 to deal with breaches. While this request was for temporary funding for a 2-year period, I believe that permanent funding is required, as breaches are a permanent and growing concern that pose a significant threat to individuals and organizations. In a digital world where the risks are higher than ever, investing in privacy is crucial. Privacy protection must be embedded throughout government programs and services. Nous devons aussi poursuivre nos efforts.
We must also continue to progress on efforts to modernize Canada's privacy laws, both the private sector law as well as the Privacy Act, which predates the Internet. And we, of course, welcome the work done by your committee, especially the report at the end of your study that focused on technologies that are used to obtain information from mobile devices, and of course today's another report on social media. We also need to make sure that my office is adequately resourced given the increasingly complex data landscape. This will continue to be a priority for us, and I will look forward to your committee's report on this important issue. And thank you for your time, and I'll be happy to answer your questions. Thank you.
Merci, Mr.
Thank you, Mr. Dufresne.
Mr. Chambers, but before we do, we got off to a half-hour start. I am going to, if it's without objection from the committee, reset the clock as we normally do, the top of the hour, to give Mr. Villemure and Mr. Green 6 minutes each, and then it should take us to about 5:30. I expect we're going to get through fully the first round. Should take us to about 5:30, and then we'll determine by the committee where we want to go from there. Mr. Chambers, you're up for 6. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Commissioner, Deputy Commissioner, thank you for appearing at committee, and thank you for your responsiveness on a couple of issues that I personally reached out to your office on, including this one. I just want to, we had a little bit of confusion around the timeline when we had CRA officials here. So if I understand you correctly, can you just confirm when were you made aware of the breach, the number of breaches dating back to 2020? Was that May 9th? Is that correct?
That's when we received the formal notification of those breaches. And the policy, the Treasury Board policy, requires that a notification be given to my office formally within 7 days of the organization being made aware of it. In this case, clearly this didn't happen because some of those incidents dated back to 2020.
And so after there was obviously a large time delay between, and CRA officials had acknowledged that they were aware of these breaches, and in fact, testimony suggests that for many of these breaches, the minister is made aware of these breaches, that they were not reported in a timely fashion. Even after that, did I hear you right? In October, they've petitioned the Treasury Board to actually not report breaches on the 7-day period. They actually want more time on a quarterly basis?
For some of them, they've identified that this was operationally challenging for them to do that. They've requested this exception, and as indicated, I was prepared to support it with some conditions. The 3-month, 7-day may not make as big a difference, but the 7-day, 3 years that we're talking about in this instance, that's the major concern. And again, if for specific operational reasons for a specific amount of time, that's a different question. But the concern that we see, and we saw it, in fact, even in this earlier investigation of the GC Key that we reported on in February, even then we had some concerns about being notified in time, getting responses in time. So it's a concern, not just for CRA, and that's why it should be a legal obligation.
That's very good advice. Do you think that there's an accountability issue within the department about who maybe owns the reporting and accountability requirements within CRA? I'm just trying to understand how, on one hand, a department would acknowledge, yes, we knew that these things were happening in real time, but failed to properly notify or follow the rules that had been set out.
Right. Well, I mean, I think what we hear is that there's a focus from the departments to notify the individuals, and that's a good thing. That's important, and you need to contain the breach. I don't know the reasons why we're not notified formally within the deadline, but what I know is that it's a concern. If we're not notified in time, we can't provide advice and guidance in time, and that elevates the risk for Canadians. And so I also know that if something is required by law, there's a greater likelihood that it's going to be complied with than it's required merely in policy or directive.
And as part of your investigation, will you be looking at the activities that gave rise to the breach? We've heard some conflicting reports about whether it's a third party, whether it may have been on the departmental side. Is that something you'll be exploring?
Well, we want to understand what happened. We want to understand whether the measures were sufficient. So we need to have the context. If there are some third parties that are involved in this situation, then we're going to look at that. If it raises questions under private sector or public sector privacy law, then we'll address that and see whether we need to amend the scope of the complaint. But our position is that the government, if the government is contracting with third parties from the private sector, the government has an obligation to make sure that its third party partners are providing adequate protection.
Right. And what obligation would, say, the department have to notify the public generally about potential breaches or risks to their own, if it's from one particular third party or some kind of similar instances? In this case, the public was not notified at all. I acknowledge that some individuals were contacted, but the general public was not made aware either.
Right. Right. Well, and there's really the three categories, right? You notify the individuals because you need to protect them. You need to make sure that they can protect themselves. You need to notify the regulator, my office. You need to notify Treasury Board and others. But the question of notifying the public then becomes a question of trust. How do you make sure that the public isn't learning of this from the media, that the individuals may also be learning of this from the media? And in fact, I think this was discussed in earlier testimony. There's also a taxpayer's ombudsperson. There's also a taxpayer's charter. And one of the principles in there is also that taxpayers be notified promptly if there's fraud schemes and so on. Again, for the reasons that this is just important for trust, and it's important to manage the stress level of individuals.
And do you feel empowered? Does your office have the right authorities to make recommendations on internal processes, accountabilities, but also, I recognize this Treasury Board exemption. I'll call it an exemption. But if you've just gone through a very difficult period where you've not reported, I find it a bit hard to imagine that the answer to that is giving the entity more time to report. You'd think it'd actually be the other way around. No, you're on remedial actions and you need to report more frequently. I think that would make a little bit of sense.
Right. Although I think there's something to be said about acknowledging a challenge meeting and meeting a requirement and explaining why and seeking an exception, I think is better than breaching it and not doing anything and not saying anything about it. So I think that's an important element. But to your question, yes, our investigation will look at that. We'll make some recommendations, as we did in the earlier investigation. And our earlier recommendation included improvements on communication, accountability. We had found in that earlier case that there was departments pointing fingers at each other and saying, it's not us, it's this department, it's that department. And we found that that was an issue and had to be corrected.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chambers, Mr. Dufresne. Going to go to Ms. Shanahan now for 6 minutes. Go ahead.
Well, thank you very much, Chair, and I want to thank the Privacy Commissioner for being here and how much we appreciate your work and how important your work is becoming. I think it's something that I can remember when I first met with the person, the commissioner occupying your role 7-8 years ago in a context of a committee, and asking about and it's sort of this vague idea of privacy. But now we understand very much what that means, and that means an individual's personal information that can be used by others, bad actors, right, to fraud either the persons themselves or other entities. And I think that this is where we're beginning to understand that there's just not one type of breach of privacy. So correct me, what are the different types of breach of privacy data breaches that we can see, and what do they look like? And refer to the one at CRA.
Well, we can see different situations where one could be employee snooping. Someone's looking at information that's not it's not theirs, and they're not entitled to it, and there's not enough security about that. You can see what we had in the investigation, which was credential stuffing, which is someone finds out your password, and you're using that same password on many accounts and many devices.
Would they have found it out from the CRA, or would they have found it out from the innocent citizen somehow?
Oh, it could be a number of factors. You could have a situation where they would find it from individuals, from third-party vendors, from other sources, and then that's reused.
Not from the CRA. I mean, especially when we look at what this incident is right now. Was it the CRA that somehow divulged people's passwords to bad actors? Is that what we're looking at?
That's not what it seems at this stage. We're going to be investigating and reaching our conclusion, but it's a situation where it appears to be passwords that were obtained elsewhere and then being used to gain access to some of the devices.
Because I do have concerns about, the My Account system. I rely on it. Many family members do. Many of my constituents do. Do you have any reason to be concerned about the CRA My Account system, where people can go online and see their income tax information?
One of the situation that we addressed in our previous investigation, I'd say in our subsequent investigation, we'll look at all of the circumstances and make recommendation. But one of the big issues that we had was the authentication of users and the fact that there was a lack of a multi-factor authentication. And that was because the sensitivity and the risk was assessed too low. And so that is one of the trends that we see, not just in this instance, but in other instances, a sense that the harm to individuals is not treated at the level that it is. And so we would say, well, you're just losing some money, so it's not your health, or it's not. And that was an issue in this instance where we disagreed, and we said, well, this is being assessed at a level 2 risk. We're assessing it at a level 3 risk because, in fact, if a fraudster takes $1,000 from you, you can get sick from that. You can get stressed from that. You can end up in major situations in terms of owing money, going to court, all those things. So we found that that's a level 3 risk, and if you treat it as a level 3 risk, you're going to put in place level 3 protections. So multi-factor.
Interesting to see that it's gotten to that level of complexity. My understanding is, and I've certainly seen the, that multi-factor authentication. You go in, you put your password in, but it says it sends a code, right? And you've got to run and get your phone, and you get the code and all of that sort of thing. So that is a step in the right direction. Very good. But for someone who is somehow gets a hold of a taxpayer's information or password, sets up a bogus tax return. Isn't that what we're talking about? A bogus tax return. It actually takes time for the CRA to determine that it is indeed a bogus tax return, right? Because you file the tax return, there's a deadline going up to April 30th, there's time for the processing, then there's actual time, and I think this is what you're referring to, that the CRA by this time is in contact with the taxpayer. These are the cases that you have seen?
Right. So the CRA is in contact with the taxpayer, informs them, and provides them with that information. And at that time, then there's advice in terms of.
Okay, but there's still a question for the CRA whether or not it was indeed the taxpayer that filed that tax return. So they're taking their measures on their side, and I think anyone who's dealt with the CRA knows that they're very thorough on how they do this. So would that not explain the delay in reporting the number to your office and why they needed to have the additional time?
Well, I think the time starts to run once you've figured out that there is a privacy breach, that there's a real risk of significant harm.
Because they had talked to the taxpayer. The taxpayer is aware, and the taxpayer is providing proof. No, this was not me, or what is this?
Right.
You know, and so the taxpayer is aware, the person most involved. But it's true that the secondary and other steps, and maybe to talk to the public at large, that there is some sort of a scheme that's going on that could be, and very often that's the case, right? That the same modus operandi is repeated. So would you say that your office was in touch with officials at the CRA during this time, that they were trying to determine what was this a one-off, or was this indeed the tens of thousands that it turned out to be?
So
I'm over time, but I will let you respond quickly if you don't mind.
Je vais vous laisser répondre rapidement. On a été en contact avec la RC.
But we only received the formal breach notification in May. And so our exchanges have been good and collaborative, but the concern is the delay in providing that formal response and those details to us as per the policy.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Dufresne, Ms. Shannon. Monsieur Villemure, pour 6 minutes, commencez, s'il vous plaît.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Mr. Dufresne. Thanks for being with us today. My colleagues asked questions about how it all functions, how it all works, and I'd like to focus on the why. And in your opening remarks, you referred to this being as an issue of trust, and trust is the absence of the requirement of showing proof. But the situation shows that there's a lack of confidence somewhere in the system. So is this the first incident that you were made aware of coming from the CRA? As I said, we had an investigation in February 2024 that was dealing with breaches that impacted 34,000 people. This was through the GC key system. So at that point in time, we issued many recommendations. We had a lot of observations, and it was clear that at the agency level and government agencies level in general, there hadn't been a risk or threat assessment that had been done. So we had to understand the impact of this on people. It's not just a data breach. It's not just a conceptual thing because, yes, thousands of dollars have been defrauded. This might have an impact on people's health, on their time, because they need to take measures and take some steps. So where measures were not satisfactory, we issued recommendations on MFA, for instance, multi-factor authentication. So we issued multiple recommendations. They were all accepted, and we had excellent collaboration with the agency during this period and since. But unfortunately, we discovered additional breaches and contacted the agency again. So the issues in terms of privacy problems, has there been an uptick in government agencies? In terms of data breaches, yes, there has been an increase in general. There are more attempts, and these attempts are having bigger impacts. For instance, for last year, we had some statistics. For a similar number of incidents, there were 2 times more Canadians that were impacted. This past year, it was 25 million people. The year before, it was 12 million. So departments are attractive targets, given the information they have. And at my office, we have multiple investigations going on. One focuses on the Department of Foreign Affairs. One had to do with the relocalization services that were offered to civil servants. So we are clearly seeing a trend internationally. There's an uptick. Do you usually have good collaboration with the different departments? So you just said that your recommendations were accepted. That's a good sign. But is it generally the case? The collaboration between ourselves and the different entities, yes, in general terms, it's very good. With the Revenue Administration, we also get together on a regular basis. For the 2020-2023 period incidents between departments, sometimes collaboration was lacking, and sometimes we heard answers such as, well, it's not us, it's the Treasury, or it's the Department of Revenue, or it's shared services. So there was a bit of a siloed approach. But this isn't really an excuse for citizens, for Canadians, because they're dealing with the government as a whole. So there needs to be formal notifications of breaches to our office, which are unfortunately still quite delayed, and they do not respect the 7-day period that is set out in the TBS policy. The siloed working manner is well known. And unfortunately, the burden is usually on the shoulders of the citizens, and it's not a very useful right because it's devoid of content. So how could we reinforce these measures? I mean, there are good measures, but they don't seem to work. I agree that having an ombudsperson who has only a recommendation power, that's not sufficient. It's not issuing a formal instruction, because recommendations are important. They're often going to be taken into account, but that's not always the case. And at that point in time, there is no recourse and the relationships are strained. So the ombudsperson, François Boileau, is an excellent colleague of ours, but unfortunately they don't have extensive powers. And when it comes to communicating with the taxpayers, that's a key aspect of it. And again, once again, goes to underline the importance of how important it is to communicate. I mean, it's just a directive. It's not law. So they have the power to issue recommendations, but they cannot impose fines, for instance. Well, you referred to different levels of risk. And can you just explain that to us a bit more? What kinds of different levels are there? When I refer to levels 2 and 3 in connection to the breaches, well, in our report, we actually explain our methodology that is used, the methodology that is used by the government. So what are the risk levels? And what are the verification levels that are required? So in this specific case, the department considered that it was a level 2 incident, and level 2 requires certain checks, but not the multi-factor authentication, which is what allowed this breach to happen. And what we say in our report is that a level 3 breach involves moderate harm, both on the financial front and in terms of someone's health situation. And we said that, in our opinion, the potential loss of thousands of dollars for an individual could certainly have a significant impact, and it can have an impact on their health, causing stress and putting people in a tough situation. And some people, maybe their salaries will be seized. Could you please provide that detail to us? I apologize, Mr. Villemure. but we spent quite a bit of time.
Yeah, go ahead for 6, please. Thanks.
Hello, Mr. Chair. I just want to note I'm on a parliamentary server, and it's saying that my internet is slow. So if I glitch, it's certainly not because I'm not using appropriate.
You're cutting in
technology.
and out, but I can hear the voice, but the video is awkward. So let's start and see where it takes us. Okay. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
It seems to still be cutting in and out, or am I
Well, the
clear
voice
now?
is working, but the video is freezing a bit. So let's see where it takes us, Mr. Green, and we'll
Okay.
we'll go from there. Okay.
I'll do the best I can. Mr. Dufresne, I'm going to ask some fairly direct questions. Mr. Chair,
The voice is
still
fine.
glitching?
Yeah. Like I said, the voice is fine. It's just the video that's cutting in and out, Mr. Green.
Okay,
So,
if the voice is fine, I'm just going to roll with it.
Yeah, go with it.
Mr. Dufresne, I'm going to ask some fairly direct questions. There's been lots of questions about the consumer impacts. The concerns that I actually have are on your delay to adequately inform Parliament. So what rationale do you have for deferring the inclusion of the 31,468 material privacy breaches until the next reporting period?
So we were informed of half of those 30,000. So we were informed of 15,000 of them at the end of our investigation into the GC key matter, and we presented a special report to Parliament on this matter in February 2024. So those 15,000 were made public, were included in that report, and that report was included in our annual report to Parliament. What we did not include is the fact of having received the formal notification of this by the department, because we had not received the formal notification of this in the fiscal year. And so that formal notification notice happened after the period that we're reporting on in our annual report. So that's why that number was not in those statistics.
Given the scale of these breaches, why was there no effort made to provide an interim or supplementary report to Parliament?
Well, we included our special report to Parliament in our annual report, so that the information of this major investigation on the CRA, including the fact that there were these 15,000 additional breaches that we had been notified late on, was part of our annual report. But the updated information that we then received after the end of that period was not included because it was not in that fiscal year.
But why not then provide an additional adequate report? Would you not agree that 15,000 material privacy breaches are in fact material to the accountability of Parliament?
Right. Well, the annual report was filed in Parliament in June. Parliament rose, and then we were into September, and we were finding out more about the situation. And then, of course, we received the complaint in October, and we announced that complaint immediately.
I guess, from my perspective on this committee, I've worked with you alongside you for quite a many years now, and I am concerned that we don't, as opposition members, at least have timely information. So you referenced, I believe in your opening statements, that given the significance of these risks and potential impacts that they can have on individuals, that timely breach reporting requirements need to be made as a legal obligation under the Privacy Act, rather than a Treasury Board Secretariat policy requirement. Would you not agree that the same duty of candor and legal requirement as a reporting mechanism to this particular committee would help to make sure that these significant issues are communicated properly?
Well, certainly I agree, and we're going to be looking at how we can improve on this. But certainly this was reported to Parliament in June. We were finding out more about the situation subsequently, and a month or so after the House returned, we announced the launch of our investigation on this. But certainly, we'll be reflecting on that in the future.
Yeah, I mean, I would put to you that we can only deal with the information we have. The governing side has the information, opposition does not, and we look to you as an arm's length arbitrator of this type of oversight, working in in partnership with this committee to help provide oversight. So when could we expect moving forward that you would be able to provide recommendations or some kind of reflection or learning from that gap in reporting that occurred between the knowledge of the breaches, the what you called fiscal cycle, the lack of interim report, and then, of course, your annual reporting?
Well, certainly, I think this will be part of the report that we issue in our investigation in this matter, because we do, as we did in the previous GCK report, talk about when we were notified, the circumstances, when the complaint was launched.
Let me ask you a more direct question, just for the benefit of this, because we might be ahead of you on this, given that we're doing this study right now. What 3 reflections can you offer this committee to ensure to us, as recommendations for the study that we're doing right now, that timely reporting will come to this committee that will give us the ability to have, of full information on these types of material privacy breaches?
Well, I think the early reflections are looking back at the GCK investigation in 2020. It was made public by the Treasury Board, and so the government department made it public, and then we launched an investigation after that. I think that's probably the preferred solution at this stage, but certainly we'll be reflecting on how this can be done in the optimal way with the government departments and my office with this committee. As I say, we issue annual reports. We issue special reports to Parliament from time to time. We'll look at all of those tools and mechanisms, but I think early thoughts would be that this should be something that the affected department makes public to Canadians.
Would you agree that the delays do affect our ability to provide parliamentary oversight, timely parliamentary oversight?
Well, I think any delay has an impact on any oversight. So certainly, the earlier the information is made available, the better.
Okay.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thanks, Mr. Green. That concludes our first round. We're going to go to our second round, 5 minutes, and I'm going to go to Mr. Caputo. Go ahead, Mr. Caputo, for 5.
Thank you very much, Chair, and I appreciate the two of you being here today for a couple of hours to answer the questions. I'm relatively new to the committee, so I don't have the knowledge that some of my colleagues do. I'll launch into a few questions, but forgive me if I'm asking some background questions to acquaint myself. Now, the minister appeared here, and I think it was mid to late November, November 18th or 21st. And what struck me from the minister's, well, first off, you saw the minister's testimony, is that correct?
Yes.
Was there anything you disagreed with when you saw the minister's testimony?
Well, as I say, my position is that my office should be notified within 7 days of those events, unless there's an exception that's granted. So that's a key point that I would say. I haven't heard that. Don't know if that's a disagreement, but this is something that I would want to see as a legal obligation.
As in, the minister should be taking action to do her job and notify you when there are these pretty significant breaches.
Well, I think all departments. I think that's certainly my position, that this should be done, should be a legal obligation, and that will allow us to provide input earlier and better.
Well, the reality is that when there's a privacy breach, it shouldn't take a law to require a minister to tell the privacy commissioner that something bad happened. We can agree on that, certainly.
Well, I would hope, but the experience shows otherwise. The experience shows that we are not given these formal notifications within a 7-day timeline.
What I found disappointing, what I do find disappointing, Commissioner, is that my impression from the minister's testimony was, we did everything we could, nothing to see here. This is on someone else or something else. Would you agree with that assessment of how she, would you agree that that is how the minister was portraying things?
Well, I think that the testimony will stand for itself. But what I am saying is that I understand departments have lots of pressure, but these notifications are important. And if it were a legal obligation in the Privacy Act with a timeline, I think we would see greater compliance in those notifications.
Now, as I understand it, Minister, in your report of findings, you made several recommendations which CRA has agreed to implement. Now, was CRA using best practices at the time to prevent these sorts of privacy breaches?
Well, that was one of the substantive issues in the investigation. So they took the position that they were. Ultimately, we found that the practices were not sufficient, and we discussed this in our special report, talking about some of the advice that had been started to be made, some of the concerns that were raised. Certainly, there were we didn't see situations of bad faith or anything like that, but there is a disagreement about what's the level of risk, what are the measures that need to be put in place here. And in our report, we made recommendations to elevate those security postures.
Unfortunately, incompetence doesn't require bad faith. You don't have to deliberately try to be incompetent, but there could still be incompetence there. So I'm really interested in what you just said. CRA believed they were doing a good enough job. Am I correct in saying you, and I'm paraphrasing here, they weren't doing a good enough job, and part of the upshot, the corollary of the fact they weren't doing a good enough job is now we have 31,000 breaches. Is that fair to say?
Well, what we found in this, let's call it the first report, because there'll be a second report on this other situation, was that there was an under-evaluation of the significance of those breaches for individuals, and that resulted in an under-protection. And so we made comments and recommendations on that. We also found that there was information sharing gaps, accountability gaps, and so we made a number of recommendations to improve the process.
So, I mean, again, from what I'm deducing here, and this is just my summary, is CRA and the minister thought they were doing a good job. They weren't. And at the end of the day, privacy breaches occurred. And now you have told them what they need to do to fix this, to prevent this in the future. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Caputo. Mr. Housefather, 5 minutes. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I imagine, Mr. Dufresne, it's your job to tell agencies of the government all the time what it is they're doing not well enough and give them corrective actions to take, correct?
Yes.
So each time you're doing that, you're not necessarily insulting them and telling them they're doing a horrible job and it's the minister's fault, right?
That's right.
Thank you. I just wanted to correct what Mr. Caputo had said. So let me come back to multi-factor authentication, which I think is a very important question. I read your February analysis, and obviously multi-factor authentication should be, I think, almost the most self-evident thing that CRA should do. Has CRA now properly, it seems to me from your report, has it now properly included multi-factor authentication in all of the places that it should?
It has. I think that there's still some time for them to finalize some of the recommendations that we put in place. Ms. Javet can correct me, but the multi-factor authentication has been put in place. So that issue is now resolved.
Okay, that's good. And are there other government departments right now that, based on the assessment that you made, right, using a 3 versus a 2, that you are aware of that are also under assessing the problems for Canadians if the privacy information gets misplaced? And have you sort of sent a letter to everyone saying they should be using multi-factor authentication based on a revised assessment?
Well, when we tabled our special report on the GC key matter in February 2024, so we were talking about the CRA, we were talking about ESDC, there were others. So part of that special report is to be a message to all departments and all of government to say, yes, look, these are the lessons that they should all take. So any department who is applying this framework, you should have a look at this and coordination with Treasury Board and so on, adjust that calibration. And so my expectation would be that all departments took notice of that decision and would be implementing it.
Are you aware of any other department that has proactively communicated with you about this report and has said, now we will do multi-factor authentication?
we've been in touch with ESDC and the CRA. I don't know if we've been notified by other departments that they are doing this, but again, my expectation is that they are, because we've made this finding public, stating that these are our expectations for the government. But Ms. Gervais,
Well, I was going to very quickly add that as part of the GCK investigation, there were 23 other organizations that were using GCK that were also interviewed. And so they would have been made very well aware, and they are they are listed in our report, the 23 institutions that were also met.
I appreciate that. I mean, est-ce qu'il y a peut-être une idée d'envoyer?
Did you think about sending a letter to all of these departments, letting them know, well, we published a report in February and it contains important information? Did you maybe take that into account? Did you consider that as a step? Well, yes, we can definitely consider that. In our discussions, it was clear that there were improvements and procedures were introduced and communication was done on those procedures. So we can do follow-up indeed to make sure that people are informed.
Point that I just wanted to raise, Mr. Chair, if I have any time left? 150. So this sounds very much to me, reading the report, that the issue is not necessarily the computer systems itself, although the computer systems themselves can be compromised by not having things like multi-factor authentication, but more people are stealing information, private information about people on dark web, and creating accounts, new accounts for them, or getting access to their existing accounts using information that they've circulated, which is different than, for example, the other problems that might exist with Trojan horses and other defects in the system itself. In the United States, I have read that about 9 years ago, such an issue existed. And what has happened since then is that private companies that are working with CRA would share information with CRA to work together to safeguard everybody's information. And it doesn't seem like that process has started in Canada at all. Is that something that you have recommended to CRA? And are there changes to our laws we would need to make to allow those companies and CRA to share information to better create a more secure overall system?
I do need a fairly quick response, if you don't mind, Mr.
Well, I think we've made our recommendations for the situation we investigated in this one, and we'll be making more recommendations as the case may be in this next investigation.
Thank you.
Thank you both. Monsieur Villemure, 2 minutes 30 seconds.
Thank you.
So in a case as the CRA one, working from home could have played a role because due to a lack of supervision, maybe. We did not have that observation in our investigation so far. We will see if that comes out as a factor in future investigations. But in risk assessment, we observed that the time it took to detect or contain the breaches were a bit of an issue, and there was information and communication that was again siloed a little bit. Now, remote work, did it contribute to this? We did not look at it from that perspective, but if remote work contributes to the siloing, then of course we're worried about information being siloed and communication being limited in that way between stakeholders. And we're also concerned, or we're also interested in understanding the teamwork at play here. So the CRA says that their systems were not compromised and the information was obtained through the dark web. Is that credible? Well, I cannot comment on that because we have the investigation that will look into this and then we will report on it. CRA said that they introduced a reporting system. I mean, isn't it a little too late given the world we live in? Because reading this information coming from them, the reaction is this should have been done a long time ago. As we did in our previous reports, when we investigate a situation, we verify what has happened and we issue recommendations. So in our February report, we issued many recommendations on the weak points and the loopholes that we observed, and we'll do the same this time around. In your opening remarks, you referred to the use of Telegram and social media. So I did not know about this aspect of things. What was the role of Telegram in all this? I don't think I mentioned Telegram. Maybe I read this somewhere else. So, but in any case, social media, how does it come into play in these sorts of situations, or does it have any consequences? What we see is that if the departments use social media platforms, if they use some service providers where the information is shared with social media platforms, then that's something we have investigated in the past, not in connection with the CRA, but when information was being shared with Meta, Facebook, for instance, and when people were receiving electronic documents as opposed to print documents. Thank you.
2.5 minutes, please.
Thank you very much. Mr. Dufresne, you had mentioned that it was the responsibility of the Treasury Board Secretariat to provide a notice of material breaches. I'm on the Secretariat's website. I don't see any major announcements of the CRA breach. Can you refer to where they would have made this public?
I was having difficulty hearing you, Mr. Green, but I think if I heard you, you're asking about the announcement of Treasury Board made by Treasury Board of the breach situation. This was made in 2020 vis-a-vis the GC key breach. It was a statement from
sure,
the...
Sure, but I'm sorry, I believe you mentioned that in your reporting, you would have reported the additional 15,000 material breaches that would have went to the Treasury Board. Presumably, the Treasury Board would have notified the public. Is that correct?
So in our special report to Parliament, we mentioned the 15,000 cases that we had been informed of at the end of this investigation. And this special report was tabled to Parliament. So this special report is public.
Do you ever take it upon yourself to do press conferences or to how do you communicate to the public when big events like this happen? Is it just that you table a report and then it's our responsibility to make it public, or what is your mandate to inform the public?
Well, from time to time we would do press conferences. In this instance, we did not. There's no set practice as to
what might be an example of a previous press conference you would have done regarding privacy breaches.
So we've done press conferences reporting on our investigation into Home Depot with respect to the sharing of email receipts, and we did a press conference in our special report on our investigation into ALO, the owner of MindGeek pornographic website.
Why those and not the CRA?
This we made these two special reports at the February 2024. We reported this alongside another of our investigation, which normally we would have reported in an annual report. So this was a new practice under the Privacy Act.
But how did you report?
There's more of a practice under the private sector legislation to make press conferences.
How did you report it?
Sorry?
How did you report it in February? With a press conference?
We reported the private sector cases with the press conferences because the private sector legislation gives me the authority to make matters public if I determine that there is a public interest in doing so. In the private sector...
Do you have that with the public sector?
Excuse me, sir?
Yeah, we're having a tough time hearing you, Mr. Green. Just speak up a bit if you can, please. Just quickly.
Yeah,
we're over time, but I'm giving you a chance.
I'm curious to know if he has the same mandate for public sector crown agencies.
So for public sector, it's more restricted. So the public sector legislation says I have to keep things confidential unless I'm presenting a special report to Parliament or an annual report to Parliament. Private sector legislation gives me more leeway, which is why we've been doing press conferences with the private sector legislation. Public sector, we've been reporting to Parliament.
Okay. So, yeah, thank you, Mr. Green. I allowed a lot more time on that one because I thought it was an important response from Mr. Dufresne. Mr. Chambers, going to go to you for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. Commissioner, just wanted to follow up on actually my colleague, Mr. Housefather, made what I thought was a reasonable recommendation with respect to comparing what happens in the United States, in particular with their tax service, the IRS, and the close coordination that they have with industry on identifying, communicating, trying to plug the holes or plug the holes in the dike, if you will, and shutting down some of these what I'll call account takeovers or whatever privacy breaches in general. That same kind of coordination doesn't seem to exist here. Do you think that would be in your remit to make some recommendations to government to explore the opportunities they have to work with third parties to address these issues?
I think so, and we've done recommendations in the past in terms of the public sector use of private sector service providers, and what are some of the parameters. What you're referring to is coordination, participation, partnership with those and perhaps with other organizations, and I think it's absolutely within my remit in making recommendations to say these are some of the best practices we want to see.
And would it be fair, just to help me understand, if the privacy breach that occurred with respect to these 31,000 cases, if that was a result of an individual company's policies, and they were aware of that company would have an obligation to report that breach to you, correct?
Private sector organizations do have an obligation
Right.
to report breaches to us.
And so just on that point, has any private sector organization made a report to you about this in particular breach?
I'll look
About
to
this?
about this.
About the
private
breach at
sector.
CRA?
No.
Okay. So when the CRA says it's a third party and the company in question says we're not aware of it, and the company in question would have an obligation to report these privacy breaches, it would make sense to believe that it could be some other nefarious third party who had access to this information. Is that correct?
Well, I don't want to speculate because we're going to be investigating all of those things, and so this will be our opportunity to get to the bottom of it.
Fair enough, and we look forward to your recommendations. Do you think that we should, or do you think maybe this committee should make recommendations, or the CRA should consider changes to its performance pay and compensation structure with respect to privacy, given how great of a concern of importance it is for Canadians?
Well, I think that every tool that can improve privacy compliance is a good one. Performance management tools are good tools because they focus the minds of executives, so I would be supportive of that. Yes.
Okay, thank you. In this general scope of privacy, something I've written to your office about before, perhaps a slightly different question, but I feel it's on topic, and I haven't had a chance to speak with you. Do you think it's in the public interest, both for members of Parliament as legislatures, but also for the public, to have a full understanding of how many individuals received the private, personal, confidential details of those individuals who had their bank accounts frozen as part of the Emergencies Act invocation?
So you're asking if it's in the public interest
to find out how far and wide that information went.
Right. Well, I think that there's situations perhaps where timing would preclude that because you want the organization to safeguard the information. So there's situations where you're going to wait a little bit before making something
Of
public.
course,
but ultimately, as a lessons learned, I think it's something that...
That's good.
Yeah.
And why I'm getting at this is because the government claims that it had sent these very private details, including previous convictions, license plate numbers, to 50 individuals, however, 50 organizations. However, a couple of those organizations, in particular the Securities Commission of Ontario, the Mutual Fund Dealers Association, then went on and sent that information to upwards of thousands of individuals, but we actually don't even know how far and wide that information went. So just trying to understand, for me, it would make sense that we know the processes that led and how far and wide, and I just wanted your opinion on whether you think the public has a right to know and whether Parliament has a right to know.
I think it's important to know how far does the breach go. So how widely was this information shared? Was it appropriately done? Were there some valid reasons? Was there some valid contractual or other protections? And so those are the things that we're going to be looking at in our investigation.
Thank you very much for your testimony.
Thank Thank you, Mr. Chambers, Mr. Dufresne. I'm going to go to Ms. Khalid now for 5 minutes. Go ahead, please.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you, Commissioner and Deputy Commissioner, for being here today. We really appreciate it. So I just want to clarify, H&R Block previously said in a statement that there's no evidence that the breach came from it. The tax firm said that a comprehensive internal investigation concluded none of its data systems, software, and security had been compromised. H&R Block said it was not aware that the Canadian taxpayers impacted by the breach were any of its own clients. Do you have any information that would confirm that?
Well, I can't speak to that because we have launched an investigation, and that's what we're going to be looking into.
So you will be coming to the bottom as to where exactly the breach occurred, right?
Yes.
So, you know, like as we go through this this digital age, the nature of nefarious actions are different, and in so many ways, the more that we're public, the more that we try to find that balance between raising public awareness and battling the crimes as they're occurring and as they're changing so fast as technology changes. Where do you think that balance is in terms of public protection and public awareness?
Well, I think that it is a balance. I think organizations need to work together. I think that this is where the importance of early notification, bringing all of the key players around the table, and that includes my office, that includes the Canadian Centre for Cybersecurity, dealing with this with all of those different perspectives is important. And then bringing lessons learned to parliamentarians, to Canadians. There are lots of tips in terms of changing your passwords, being aware of those things, but ultimately we want organizations to have very, very strong privacy protective mechanisms to diminish the load on individuals.
So what do you think the nature of that relationship should be? I mean, who is ultimately accountable here?
Well, ultimately, departments and the government and private sector, whoever controls the information is accountable for it. They have legal obligations under the Privacy Act. They have legal obligations under the private sector privacy legislation. And those obligations include, in the private sector, notifying regulators, getting input, getting advice, getting best practices. And I think we're seeing public sector and private sector are aware of this. People are seeing the cost. People are seeing the harm. We need to do more to be more successful.
I appreciate that. And, you know, recently the government hosted an auto theft summit, which I think deals with a lot of these similar issues, in that, you know, as digital technologies are used more and more in vehicles, it makes it easier for them to be stolen, for example, and to bring all of industry and governments, different levels of government and police together. I think it led to some really significant steps forward. What do you think, who should be at the table if we were going to have a conversation like this with respect to privacy, especially in the breach that we're talking about today?
Well, I always say make sure that you have the experts, so Canadian Centre on Cybersecurity, make sure you have the regulator. In my case, my office, make sure that we are consulted, make sure that we're involved early on. This is why I've recommended privacy impact assessments be made a legal requirement, and that this be publicly done, because it will raise confidence. And then there's a role to work even beyond our sectors. I'm working very closely with the Competition Bureau and the CRTC, Copyright Board. So wherever there are these commonalities, partnership, collaboration is always going to be beneficial.
And lastly, I'll ask, can you help us understand the difference in the roles between ministries, departments, and agencies as they engage with you?
Well, their obligations are similar in the sense that they all have the obligation to protect personal information that they have, that Canadians entrust them with, and making sure that they have adequate safeguards, making sure that they work with my office, with the Treasury Board, to report timely and to be responsive to the recommendations. And so I think it's an important obligation, and it's important because it goes to Canadians' trust, and because those breaches have significant impact on Canadians.
Thank you very much, Commissioner. Those are all the questions I have.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Khalid and Mr. Dufresne. We're going to go to our and reset the clock here. I am glad you brought up the issue of H&R Block, though, because that had not been brought up to this point. I'm equally glad to hear, Mr. Dufresne, that they are part of the investigation because they were implicated in this. In fact, the motion that was passed by this committee was to have H&R Block come to it to answer questions, and we've received correspondence from them, as committee members know, that they've done their own internal investigation and they found that it wasn't their issue. So look forward to your report on this to see if at all they were involved in information of Canadians was not breached as a result of their mechanisms as well. 6 minutes. This will take us to about 5:30, so I'm going to leave it up to the committee to decide where they want to go past this point. But Mr. Barrett, you have 6 minutes. Go ahead.
In 2020, you made several recommendations to the government. Do you believe that the recommendations that you made are being followed by the government?
I do. They're not. Some of them have 12 months implementation time period, and my sense is they are on track to meet them.
Would the implementation of any of those recommendations prior to this point have prevented the breach that occurred?
We're going to be looking into that in our current investigation, so I can't speak on that.
Is it your view that privacy breaches should be immediately brought to the attention of Canadians?
Well, there are situations where you might need to keep something confidential because you want to address it, you want to contain it, you don't want the threat actors to have the information. So there is a balancing there, but certainly it's important that my office be made aware on a timely basis and that the discussion takes place about public communication to do that as soon as possible.
So in news reports on this matter, it says, and I quote, according to sources, the crisis prompted the CRA, Canada Revenue Agency, to contact the Office of Revenue Minister Marie-Claude Bebeau. The agency prepared media lines to respond to inquiries should there be questions about the breach of H&R Block data and why the agency paid out millions to scammers. In the end, the public was never alerted to the scheme, end quote. So the scenario that you described, sir, was to help contain the threat, perhaps, and take action, inform your office immediately before then informing Canadians. This looks like a government not protecting Canadians, but protecting themselves from the criticism of Canadians who were the victims of potentially the government's negligence, likely the government's negligence. Do you believe that it's appropriate? No. Do you believe it's acceptable for the minister to have withheld this information from Canadians?
Well, I think that my office should have been notified earlier than it was, and I think it's beneficial for Canadians to have information as soon as possible. So there may be circumstances where it needs to be kept confidential longer, but I point to the 2020 situation where the Treasury Board had made a public announcement on this, and so Canadians were aware. And on the earlier situation.
Right. In this case, they didn't, and they literally just prepared a damage control plan and didn't inform Canadians whose personal information was being used for the ill-gotten financial gains of fraudsters and criminals. Isn't there an ethical, a moral obligation of the minister acting on behalf of the Crown to have informed Canadians?
Well, I think in terms of best practices, I would want to see notifications to my office, and I would want to see notifications.
And that didn't happen. So your office was not notified.
We were notified, but late. We were notified.
Quantify that.
Well, we were supposed to be notified 7 days after the department became aware. We were notified in May 2024.
How many days later was that?
Some of those breaches dated back to 2020. So,
right.
So we're talking many days.
And continue with your answer.
And so in terms of public information, I think public information is important so that lessons can be drawn. There was a public announcement by the Treasury Board in 2020 in the GC Key matter. We investigated it. We issued our recommendation. And these are publicly available statements and conclusions that help the public debate and help conclusions being drawn. So, again, subject to some confidentiality provisions, which may be legitimate for a certain time, these matters should be made public.
And the Canadians that have been defrauded would rightly lose confidence in the institutions, the institution of government generally, but also in this case, in the Canada Revenue Agency, which has extraordinary powers, extraordinary access, and is, it can be the vector by which individuals end up jailed, fined, their wages can be garnished, assessed massive penalties, and this organization, this minister, opted instead to lie by omission to Canadians. Canadians were expected to believe that everything was okay because we haven't been told any different. Does it cause irreparable harm to the institution of government when this information is concealed from Canadians?
Well, what we highlighted in our earlier report is that these breaches have impacts on Canadians, and they can cause stress. You highlight the garnishment. There can be situations where people have to take steps, very distressing steps. So as much as possible has to be done for Canadians in these circumstances to inform them, notify them, protect them, and to draw lessons from that.
In my remaining time, Chair, I want to give notice of a motion. Given that, at a time when Canadians are lining up at food banks in record numbers and facing the worst cost of living crisis in a generation, Justin Trudeau's Minister of Emergency Preparedness accepted 2 taxpayer-funded VIP suite tickets to attend a Taylor Swift concert in Vancouver. The committee call on the Minister of Emergency Preparedness and PAVCO Chair Gwendolyn Point to testify before the committee for no less than 2 hours separately, and order PAVCO to provide the names of all federal ministers, officials, or staff provided with tickets to any of the Taylor Swift concerts at BC Place and any related communications.
Okay, thank you for that, Mr. Barrett. The motion is on notice. That concludes your time. Mr. Fisher, you have 6 minutes. Go ahead, sir.
Chair, and thank you to our witnesses for being here. Really appreciate your very focused answers, and it's really helped in a situation that not everybody has, a depth of understanding of. So some of the things that I've scribbled down here may seem like they're not in any specific order, but they're things that have been said during your discussion today. What is credential stuffing?
Credential stuffing is when you're reusing passwords that you've obtained from other sources, and you're using this as a bad actor to gain access through to websites and to portals, essentially to gain access to information.
You talked about, and obviously we know that data breaches are on the rise, and you talked about, and I think you were speaking about your office, having to continuously adapt. You talked about some one-time funding. You talked about a need maybe for that to be more permanent. Can you tell me a little bit about how you are, as an office, continually adapting to this increase in data breaches?
Yes, so we have made these funding requests to Parliament. We've obtained temporary funding. We will be continuing to push for this to be permanent because those breaches are not diminishing. We're looking at our processes right now within the OPC. One of my 3 strategic priorities is to protect and promote privacy with maximum impact. So we're looking at our structures. We're looking at is there enough resourcing that we are putting in the compliance side of the office, including the breach protection. So we're asking for more permanent resources, but we're also looking internally to see how are we structured? How are we operating? We're also looking into our technological knowledge. We have a technology lab, and we're continuously developing our expertise there. We're also working with international partners, also with partners in Canada, the privacy commissioners in the provinces and territories, but also international partners. I indicated I launched an investigation with my colleague, the UK commissioner, on 23andMe, and that's an investigation into another major breach. So we're leveraging each other's expertise. We're learning from each other, and cyber breach and security is a theme that we're discussing more and more in the privacy community here in Canada and around the world.
Thank you for that. You excuse me, you talked about some of your recommendations, improving communications, incident response plans, accountability. How have reporting procedures and methods changed because of these events, or have they?
Well, the measures have changed because of the recommendations we made in that investigation. CRA and ESDC have taken steps. They've put in place multi-factor authentication. They have worked on their processes, their assessments, the communication frameworks. As I say, some of those recommendation elements had a 6-month timeline. Some of them have a 12-month timeline. So they're not all completed, but they're on track to being completed. And so that's what we want to see when we make recommendations. In this case, the departments agreed with our recommendations, accepted to implement them. We want to see that, and we'll see what this next investigation results in. And if there have been some shortcomings, then there'll be more recommendations, and we would expect the same collaboration and compliance.
MFA, multi-factor authentication. Mr. Housefather brought it up. I think a few other people mentioned it as well. If MFA was present, would that have solved this particular breach or this set of breaches?
Well, we found that in the investigation that we did in the 2020 GC Key, in many cases it would have. In many cases it would have provided additional protection, which would have prevented the breach. But without it, it's all too easy to gain access.
It's funny, whenever I have to enter a site that has MFA, I always groan and lament the extra process I have to do. But after this conversation and after this ethics meeting today, I'll be much more willing to entertain that extra step for MFA based on some of the things you've said. Do I have any time left, Mr.? What improvements additionally that maybe have not been talked about today would you like to see made to better coordinate different government agencies to protect the confidential information of Canadians?
Well, a number of things that we'd want to see. I talked about breach reporting. We need to see this a legal obligation in the Privacy Act. We need to see order-making powers for my office. This is something that I don't have at the moment, and that adds potential delays. If you have a department who agrees with the recommendations, that works. But if they don't, then we need to go to court, and that's delays and that's cost. I want to see privacy impact assessments being mandatory and not a Treasury Board policy, because privacy impact assessments are also part of the solution to this. It's early risk assessment of new programs, new tools, and so this is important. We want to see necessity and proportionality as a requirement under the Privacy Act. It's not currently, and it's a requirement for the private sector. So it should be similar standards of protection for public sector and private sector. And the collaboration between different offices. One of the challenges currently in Canadian privacy law is I cannot do a joint investigation with my colleague, the Competition Commissioner of Canada. I could do that with the US FTC. And so that's a gap, and we need more of that collaboration, including to deal with breaches.
Okay. That's it. Thank you. Mr. Dufresne. Monsieur Villemure, pour 6 minutes, s'il vous plaît.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Chair. Well, a lot has been said, and I do not want to make you repeat some of the points you've covered, but I'd like to go back to a previous point I made. I'm intrigued by one thing. Why does this happen, and why does it keep happening? And there are more users, more applications, more platforms. Yes, all that is valid, but it's maybe also about changing all these structures without taking care of the culture, which is doomed to fail. So why do these things keep happening, and what can we do to prevent? I mean, it will still keep happening, but how can we improve the situation? I think the contributions made by your committee through the reports and the recommendations, the contributions from my office in its investigations and reports are important. And we will take a look on our end. But the public communication on the tools that are available is key. It will help improve privacy in general, but more specifically when it comes to these breaches, because sometimes we think that it's a very technical question. We don't really want to have complicated passwords. We don't want to go through multi-factor authentication. But why is it important in the world in which we live today? Because there's a lot of information shared on many platforms. So we have to really have that reflex built into us, and it really has a major impact on people. So these are some of the lessons we can already draw from our first report. We have been saying that you're underestimating the impact, the potential impact on people. When problems happen, you should not really point at that department, this department. We're all a team and we have to find solutions. So it all comes back to education and awareness when we talk about privacy. And maybe the level of literacy in terms of privacy isn't what it needs to be. And I'd like to see a law rather than a directive. But that's only to fix the problems. But in terms of prevention and the culture, well, often we ask the same question: is this a government of obscurity or transparency? And I find the current situation worrying because it prevents a culture of accountability. For literacy, I think it's one of the recommendations that in the report that you published today. I think it's very important to enable people, and it would also take discussions with our colleagues from the different provinces and territories, maybe courses and classes at schools. So the more we can equip people, the better. But we should not really free institutions of responsibility and accountability. People, of course, should be aware, but the institutions still have a role to play. Well, that's a question I think about a lot, because when the minister was here, what I understood from her testimony was that the burden was on the user. But in terms of awareness raising, maybe there is work to be done, but the minister was almost washing her hands off of responsibility, and which I found unacceptable. So yes, people can be more aware, but it doesn't mean institutions don't have a role to play. So courses maybe on the importance of privacy as a fundamental right, could be introduced. It could be made compulsory reading, for instance. I agree. We issued a report this summer on fraudulent practices in terms of consent. That was some work we did with our international partners, and these practices are very common, using complex language, using really tools of psychology to push people towards choices that are not necessarily good for them. And these are choices that mean that people end up revealing too much information. So we have to enable people, equip them so that they can identify these circumstances. But institutions should also continue doing this work. It should be easy for one person to protect their privacy. It will maybe never be too easy, but it should be easier than it is. I mean, I spend a lot of time unchecking boxes and changing settings. So if people knew and understood more about what we're trying to protect, that will be a step in the right direction. But there are fraudulent practices as well. So people, I think, after a certain period of time, they get bored of these things. When people ask for an email receipt, for instance, in one of our investigations, we saw that this information was shared with Meta, Facebook, and this information was not shared with the clients. And then the answer was, well, it's in our policy on our website. So there's a consent fatigue, if you will. And this is simply not acceptable because you're putting the burden on people, and it's not just a reasonable thing to expect from people that they will go and do some research on that. And recently, we won our case against Facebook with regard to their consent practices. The Federal Appeals Court said that the text was longer than a short story by Alice Munro. So it's long and complex text, and it makes it almost impossible for people to get to the bottom of it. Thank you, Mr. Villemure, and thank you, Mr. Dufresne. I have been informed that there are no other questions from the Conservatives and the Liberals, so Mr. Green will take the last the floor.
Bring it home.
Wow. I'll take it somewhere. I don't know if it'll be a Conservative slogan, but I would say that I'm still stuck on. I'm still stuck on this one.
That's okay. Your voice is working beautifully. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Dufresne, you had mentioned that there's a different mandate for public disclosure of private companies versus public agencies or departments. Why is that the case?
So under the Public Sector Privacy Act, I'm mandated to keep information confidential that I received in my mandate, unless I'm making it public in an annual report to Parliament or a special report to Parliament. So there's a limit there. In the private sector legislation, I also have to keep it confidential, but the Act gives me the authority to make it public if I determine that it is in the public interest that it is made public. And that is the authority that we regularly use to make private sector matters public, including with press conferences. And so that's the practice. In fact, the practice of the OPC used to be that it was once a year that all of the public sector complaints were made public through the annual report. I've decided to change this year because I felt it was too long to wait an entire year before making these things public. So that's why we started doing special reports, including in this matter, to make it public to Parliament. I take the point, perhaps making more press conferences and these as well should be done.
I appreciate that. I'm going to reclaim my time. It's scarce. So what you described was the mandate. And so within your mandate, you are following the rules of the mandate. I would just put to you, given that this is a government that, claims like it wants to have a culture of transparency, would it not be helpful to just have equal consideration for disclosure of privacy breaches, regardless of whether it's private sector or public sector? Like, in your opinion, what's the benefit of not having that in a mandate for both sides, public and private?
There's no benefit. I agree absolutely with you, Mr. Green. I think that this is something that should be amended in the Privacy Act. We've been calling for legislative amendment of the Privacy Act for some time. It's a 40-year-old piece of legislation. This should absolutely be one of the changes. In the meantime, I've started to use this special tool of doing a special report to Parliament, and we're going to reflect as to whether we can do more, including press conferences.
Yeah, I would put to you, in quasi-legal terms, my friend called it lying by omission. I would say it's a material non-disclosure. The public has a right to know when there are breaches and whether or not it's caused by private third parties like H&R Block, when it's going through an agency like the CRA, which, as we've heard, have like profound impacts on Canadians, people who are, embroiled in potential fraud allegations, people who no longer get access to their GIS or their OAS. It's a significant thing. So I'm happy to hear you before committee recommending that we provide within your mandate that you had also mentioned your ordering powers. Can you expand on that a little bit and why that would be important to demand full disclosure and not have obstruction from, I would call them, belligerent departments?
I'm sorry, I have a hard time. I didn't hear the last part of your question.
I'm going to need sound. Sorry, Mr. Green, I've stopped your time. There is a little bit of chatter on all sides here. I want Mr. Dufresne to hear Mr. Green clearly. Mr. something's going on with his microphone. It's kind of muted. I've mentioned it to the clerk before. So, Mr. Green, if you can restate your question for Mr. Dufresne, and then I'll start your clock after that. Go ahead, sir.
I appreciate that, Mr. Chair. I'll speak a little bit louder. Maybe that'll help. I just put the question that, given the I'm happy to hear that you're calling for this recommendation. You also mentioned the importance of having greater powers, order-making powers, so that if there's administrative sabotage or departmental belligerence not wanting to cooperate with your investigations, that having greater powers within your commission would allow more timely reporting. Can you expand on why that's so important?
Well, it's important because we have seen many situations where we receive these reports late, as we did in this instance. And that creates the type of situations that we've seen here. It prevents us from giving advice early on, to work with the organizations early on. And so if this is a legal obligation, I am convinced that there will be greater compliance with this with public sector institutions. It's a legal obligation for private sector organizations. It should be a legal obligation for public sector organizations.
In keeping with that spirit, do you feel like you have adequate penalties or deterrents, administrative deterrents for people who fail to comply or are repeat habitual offenders and breaches? Do you have enough power within your commission to hold real accountability?
I do not, because both for the private sector and the public sector, I do not have order-making powers and I do not have the ability to issue fines. And so those are recommendations that we've made to Parliament, both for the public sector and for the private sector. It's being proposed in Bill C-27 for the private sector, and I would want to see this certainly in an upcoming bill dealing with public sector privacy law.
You did mention recommendations from the 2020 GC Key debacle and your study on that. You'd mentioned that some of them had some progress. In your opinion, were there any recommendations that weren't followed that may have led to the continued gaps in the administration of privacy on this most recent breach by the CRA?
Well, that will be part of what we assess in the investigation in terms of seeing what happened when, and were the recommendations that we did in our GC Key matter, when were they implemented, and did these things occur before or after? For instance, the multi-factor authentication and the improvements in terms of the process and verification. So that will certainly be part of our conclusions in this upcoming investigation.
That concludes my questions. Thank you very much, Mr. Dufresne, for being here. And thank you to the committee for struggling through my IT issues. I'll hope to have those resolved for next meeting. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Green. That concludes our round of questioning. Mr. Dufresne and Ms. Gervais, on behalf of the committee, I'd like to thank you for being here today and accommodating us. I know we had a little bit of difficulty last time, but we made it through this time. And you may as well settle in, Mr. Dufresne. You're coming back on Tuesday on the TikTok issue, so I appreciate you making yourself available back-to-back to this committee as well. So that concludes the meeting for today. I want to thank everyone, the clerks, the analysts. I will just to advise the committee that you did receive an email from the clerk with respect to questions that had been asked of Twitter or X. They should be in your email right now, so keep an eye out for that. Thank you, everyone. Have a great weekend. Meeting's adjourned.